system. So this shows the different organs of the endocrine system, pretty much all our glands. And the first thing we need to know is the function of hormones. So hormones influence almost every cell and organ in the body. They influence metabolism, or how your cells use energy. They influence hunger, our stress response, sleep, and many other things. Next, we're going to compare the nervous and endocrine system. So you have a little table to fill out. The endocrine system is going to be using hormones to relay messages, and the nervous system is going to be using neurotransmitters, or we could say electrical signals. Next line says releases into, so the endocrine system releases its hormones into the bloodstream, whereas the nervous system secretes neurotransmitters into a synapse. That's that space in between the neurons. Next line says response to stimuli. For the endocrine system, that is slowly. For the nervous system, that is quickly. And then next line says the effects are. So for the endocrine system, the effects are long-lasting. And for the nervous system, the effects are short-lived or short-lasting. And then the last line in the table, it says adapts to continual stimulation. For the endocrine system, it adapts slowly. For the nervous system, it adapts quickly. So the nervous system is in charge of things that need to happen quickly, things like movement, speech. Endocrine system is in charge of things that can take more time, like growth or things like hunger. Those are controlled by hormones. Alright, next is the different types of hormones. So basically you have steroid and non-steroid hormones. Sometimes the non-steroid hormones are called protein hormones. So another table. Steroid hormones are synthesized from cholesterol, and that makes them lipid soluble. Some examples might be estrogen or testosterone. Non-steroid hormones are synthesized from proteins. Sometimes they're just an amino acid, or it might be a small protein. Next line says binds to receptors. So steroid hormones bind to receptors in the nucleus. Since they're lipid soluble, they go right through the cell membrane and into the nucleus. And generally they bind to a receptor that is going to start protein synthesis. Non-steroid hormones bind to receptors on the cell membrane. They're not lipid soluble, so you can see they bind to receptors on the cell membrane. Then that's going to activate another molecule, a second messenger, and then eventually we get a reaction. Alright, so a question, which is a characteristic of endocrine glands? And correct answer is C. So neurotransmitters would be the nervous system. Their ducts carry secretions to the blood, and they do have a long-lasting effect, and they respond slowly to stimuli. Alright, now we need to describe how the hypothalamus controls the secretions of the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus is right above the pituitary gland, and there's a special blood vessel system in between the two called the hypophyseal portal system. So the neurons secrete either releasing or inhibiting hormones, neurons from the hypothalamus. Those travel through this hypophyseal portal system and to the anterior pituitary, and then it will release or suppress hormones. So for example, the hypothalamus can release growth hormone releasing hormone or growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So say it releases growth hormone releasing hormone, that's going to go to the pituitary gland and cause it to release more growth hormone. If the hypothalamus instead releases growth hormone inhibiting hormone, say you don't have enough nutrients to grow right now, so it will release that will travel to the pituitary gland, and then it will stop releasing growth hormone. So some of the hormones released by the hypothalamus would include gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, and that goes to the pituitary and tells it to secrete FSH and LH. Thyrotropin releasing hormone goes to the pituitary and tells it to release TSH. corticotropin releasing hormone goes to the pituitary and tells it to release ACTH. Prolactin releasing hormone again goes to the pituitary, tells it to release prolactin. Prolactin inhibiting hormone would inhibit secretion of prolactin. Growth hormone releasing hormone would go to the pituitary and tell it to secrete growth hormone. So let's look at some disorders. These all have to do with growth hormone. So gigantism is when too much growth hormone is released during childhood and puberty. These people get really tall, their bones and muscles will grow a lot. Might make you good at basketball, but a lot of times they're so big that it's hard to be coordinated. So that's if there's too much growth hormone before puberty. Acromegaly is when too much growth hormone is released after puberty. So remember, at the end of puberty, the epiphyseal plates in your long bones are going to close, so they can't grow in length anymore. But the bones, like in the hands, the short bones, and the bones in your face that are flat bones, they can still grow. So one sign of acromegaly, these people have like a really huge jaw, really big face, really big hands and feet. Then pituitary dwarfism is when not enough growth hormone is released during childhood and puberty. Nowadays we can correct that really easily by just giving them growth hormone. Alright, next thing is some of the hormones of the pituitary gland. So again, this figure shows how the hypothalamus releases hormones into the pituitary gland. So let's go through the list. Growth hormone is my favorite hormone because it does what it's named for. So its target is really all cells, and it's going to promote protein synthesis. It especially does this in bone and muscle cells. So in bones, it's going to tell the cells to produce more collagen. In muscles, it's going to tell the cells to produce more actin and myosin and all the proteins needed for muscles. PRL is prolactin. Its target is the mammary glands, and it promotes milk production. TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, its target is the thyroid gland, and it causes it to secrete thyroid hormone. So that's another one that does what it's named for. ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, its target is the adrenal gland, and it's going to tell the adrenal gland to secrete corticosteroids, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Then FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, goes to the gonads, which would be either the ovaries or the testes, and it stimulates the production of either eggs or sperm. Then LH is luteinizing hormone. It also goes to the gonads. In females, it's going to trigger ovulation, also estrogen and progesterone secretion. In males, it's going to go to the testes and promote testosterone secretion. Then the posterior pituitary, we have ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. It goes to the kidneys, and it's going to reduce the urine volume to conserve water. So if you're not getting enough water in your diet, you'll release more ADH, and then you'll produce less urine. Oxytocin, its target is the uterus and breasts. So contraction of smooth muscle in the uterus to promote childbirth, and in the breasts, it promotes milk release. Alright, next is how hormone secretion is controlled by the nervous system and by negative feedback. So nervous system control is pretty simple. The brain monitors the conditions, and then it triggers hormone release as needed. So for example, the brain might be looking at how many nutrients you have, seeing if you can release growth hormone or not. And the way it's controlled by negative feedback, the pituitary gland will stimulate a gland to release a hormone, and that hormone will go back to the pituitary gland, which halts the release of that hormone. So for example, to the pituitary gland and stops the release of luteinizing hormone. And so that negative feedback helps keep the hormone levels at our normal level at homeostasis. Alright, in the brain, sort of in the middle of the brain, we have the pineal gland. It's going to release melatonin, and it helps with sleep. You can buy melatonin supplements to help you sleep, and they say you're not supposed to give them to kids, but why do they make them as gummies if you're not supposed to give them to kids? One problem, seasonal affective disorder, is caused by low levels of melatonin. So it happens in the wintertime, maybe when we're not getting enough light, so light therapy can actually help with this. Alright, next gland we're going to talk about is the thymus. This one is active when you're young. It kind of goes away as you age. Once you're done with puberty, it kind of goes away, but it produces thymus and thymopoietin, and these help with the development of the immune system. So once your immune system is developed, once you're an adult, you don't really need this anymore. So again, they help with development of the immune system. Then next gland we're going to talk about is the thyroid gland, and there's a little table for the thyroid gland. So the first hormone that's released is calcitonin. Calcitonin causes deposition of calcium in bone. So if our calcium levels are high, we'll release calcitonin. It's important in growth, helps our bones grow. So its target would be bones, and in fact it helps with deposition of calcium in the bone. Then we have thyroid hormone, also known as T3 and T4. Its target is pretty much all cells, and it increases the metabolic rate. It's necessary for growth and development. People with low thyroid levels, they're going to have a lower metabolism, and we're going to talk about some of those disorders next. So thyroid disorders. Cretinism is a lack of thyroid hormone. It leads to retarded growth, low metabolic rate, and mental retardation, because your nerves actually need thyroid hormone to grow and develop properly. Graves' disease is hypersecretion of thyroid hormone, so too much thyroid hormone being released. This causes weight loss, nervousness, increased heart rate. This could be due to a tumor that causes oversecretion of thyroid hormone. Next one is simple goiter. This is an enlarged thyroid gland caused by a dietary deficiency of iodine. So if you don't get enough iodine, you can't produce thyroid hormone, because iodine is one of the main components. When the thyroid gland can't produce thyroid hormone, your pituitary gland releases more TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's trying to tell the thyroid gland to make more thyroid hormone, but it can't because there's no iodine, so it causes the thyroid gland to grow, and you can see these people with these huge bulges in their necks. Today we have iodized salt, and most of us get plenty of iodine in our diet that way. Alright, next gland we're going to talk about is the parathyroid gland. So if we're looking at the thyroid gland from the back, there are 4 parathyroid glands on the back of it. It releases parathyroid hormone, so that should be easy to remember. Parathyroid hormone is released in response to low blood levels of calcium, so it raises your blood calcium levels, as we'll see on this page. Parathyroid hormone affects the bones. It actually activates osteoclasts to increase their activity, so they're breaking down more bone, and then the calcium from that bone goes into your blood. It also acts on the small intestine, causing it to absorb more calcium, and it also acts on the kidneys, causing it to reabsorb calcium, and also increasing the blood levels of calcium. You can see over here, kind of opposite, if there's too much blood calcium, calcitonin would be released. Calcium is moved from the blood to the bone, and that gives the levels back to normal. Alright, we need to know some calcium abnormalities. So hypocalcemia is when there's not enough calcium, and so we talked in the muscle chapter about how we need calcium for muscle contraction. So if there's not enough, this can lead to muscle spasms or tetany, where the muscle is almost continuously contracted. Hypercalcemia leads to muscle weakness, sluggish reflexes, and can even lead to cardiac arrest. Next, we're going to talk about the adrenal glands. Two parts of the adrenal glands. So the outer part is called the adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla releases epinephrine and norepinephrine. These used to be called adrenaline. Their effects, they increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, increase the blood flow to muscles, and increase glucose levels in the blood so that our muscles have plenty of glucose for energy. It's preparing us to either run away or fight. And then if we look at the adrenal cortex, so that would be the inside part, it releases mineralocorticoids. The main one is aldosterone. Glucocorticoids, the main one is cortisol. And then the sex steroids, testosterone and estrogen. So adrenal cortex releases aldosterone, cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen. So aldosterone helps with sodium retention, which helps with water retention, so it keeps our ions like sodium and potassium in balance, which helps our water stay in balance. Cortisol helps us adapt to stress and also repair damaged tissue. It's anti-inflammatory. It can suppress the immune system, so if you're stressed out for too long, that's not good for your immune system. And then testosterone and estrogen, they cause the development of pubic and axillary hair. They're also responsible for the sex drive in both sexes. The endocrine gland that has a role in the immune system would be the thymus. Next, we're going to look at some adrenal disorders. So Cushing syndrome is due to excess cortisol. Some symptoms of that would be what's called a moon face, very round face. They have it's called a buffalo hump in their back. Hyperglycemia, too much sugar in the blood. Muscle weakness and edema are all signs of, or symptoms of Cushing syndrome. And then for Addison's disease, this is when your body does not produce enough aldosterone and cortisol. This can cause a loss of fluid and electrolytes, which leads to weakness, muscle wasting, dehydration, and weight loss. This can be fatal if we don't have the right balance of electrolytes like sodium and potassium. Those are necessary for action potentials. And if we can't generate action potentials in the heart, it will stop beating. Alright, next is the pancreas. So the pancreas is an exocrine organ. It's part of our digestive system. It produces a lot of digestive enzymes. It also produces some hormones for us. So inside there are these little, what are called islets of Langerhans. And the alpha cells are going to secrete the hormone glucagon. So this is released when blood sugar is low. Glucagon stimulates the liver to convert glycogen into glucose. So it causes the blood glucose levels to rise. So this would be released like after you haven't eaten for a while. then beta cells are probably, so this figure shows what happens after eating. Blood glucose goes from the digestive tract into the bloodstream. The high glucose levels in the blood is going to stimulate the beta cells of the pancreas to secrete insulin. Then insulin stimulates cells to take up more glucose, and it also causes the liver to store glucose as glycogen. So that's going to bring our blood sugar levels down. And then again, when blood glucose levels drop too low, the alpha cells will release glucagon. That will cause glucose to be released from the liver and get the blood levels back to normal. One more cell in the pancreas we can't forget are the delta cells. They secrete somatostatin. This helps regulate other endocrine cells. It's also known as growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So, for example, if we don't have enough glucose in our blood, we don't want to be releasing growth hormone because we don't have enough nutrients to grow at that point. Alright, next is the symptoms of diabetic mellitus. So some symptoms, the main symptom is high blood glucose, which leads to polyuria, which means you're peeing a lot. Polyphagia means you're always hungry, you're eating a lot. This can lead to diabetic ketoacidosis. So this, instead of using glucose, you're breaking down other things for energy. This will mess with your pH in your blood, and all of this leads to damage to small blood vessels. This leads to things like heart attack, stroke, blindness, nerve problems. Kidney disease is another complication. So not a fun disease to have. Then we need to compare type 1 and 2 diabetes. So you have a table to fill in. So for type 1, the average age of onset is before 30. Generally happens in children. For type 2, it's usually after 40. For the rate of onset for type 1, it is rapid. For type 2, it's gradual. For the percent of all diabetics, type 1 is about 10% of all diabetics, and type 2 is 90% of all diabetics, so the majority. Type 1 is an autoimmune disease where the body attacks the beta cells and then you can't release insulin. Type 2, your cells can become resistant to insulin, or the body stops producing enough insulin. One theory is that if you overeat or you eat too much sugar, your beta cells have to keep producing insulin and they just get exhausted and they can't produce enough insulin anymore. For contributing factors, for type 1 it's hereditary. For type 2, excess body weight, a sedentary lifestyle are main factors. It also seems to be hereditary. Then for treatment for type 1, they need daily insulin. That can be through injections, or now they have insulin pumps that just pump it under your skin like constantly. For type 2, lifestyle changes can treat it. Getting more exercise, eating better. There are some oral medications that help your body use the insulin better. And if it gets bad enough, these people need insulin injections as well. Alright, now we go to the gonads. So the ovaries in females, they release estrogen, and its effects are the development of female characteristics and the reproductive system. And then in males, the testes release testosterone. Its effects are the development of male sexual characteristics and sperm production.